Hello, Lina Khatib, Director of the SOAS Middle East Institute in London. Thank you for being here with us today for this short video podcast of ours. We will have a short chat on Lebanon. Of course, these are crucial hours. As you know, the Israeli cabinet has approved a ceasefire that will end the clashes between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. What does this ceasefire mean?
This is a monumental ceasefire because if it had been a short-term truce, like, for example, what happened with Gaza in 2023 when some hostages were released, that was a very temporary situation, and it didn't come with extensive terms regarding, for example, the behavior of Israel or the behavior of Hamas. Whereas this time, we have a long-term ceasefire with no expiry. Even though it says 60 days, the terms that the ceasefire come with basically are permanent. And these terms pose huge constraints on Hezbollah in terms of its ability to maneuver militarily inside Lebanon against Israel. And this is not something that had ever really happened between Hezbollah and Israel. So even after their last war of 2006, the ceasefire that ended that war did not have the same conditions that this ceasefire basically requires. So perhaps it would be a good idea to talk about some of these details just to kind of give...
Exactly, just to make our public more aware of what exactly do both parts want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to this ceasefire agreement, the reason why it's so monumental is that it says, for example, that only the Lebanese state should handle the proliferation of weapons in Lebanon. Now, of course, Hezbollah has been the only entity other than the Lebanese army that has been allowed to have weapons in its possession and use them in Lebanon. So the ceasefire terms change that. The ceasefire terms also say that Hezbollah is not allowed to proactively attack Israel. So even if Hezbollah still is in possession of some weapons, it will not be able to proactively deploy them against Israel. The ceasefire also says that there will be international oversight regarding the implementation of this agreement, and the US is going to be the main actor overseeing this implementation. Of course, Hezbollah is backed by Iran, and ultimately, it is Iran that has given the green light for the ceasefire agreement to happen. And this in turn means that Iran has basically accepted US oversight over one of its key proxies in the region. And this is a major departure from the Iranian position that we have, been seeing for decades. So even if the terms are 60 days, these kinds of conditions are likely to be extended when the new presidential term happens in Washington and Donald Trump takes over as president. And it is likely that the new American administration will want to build on the terms of the 60 days. So I don't see personally a return to fighting in 60 days. I see these terms as setting the scene for a permanent shift in the power dynamics between Hezbollah and Israel.
So do you think that the parts will indeed respect this is what you expect, that this part will respect the agreement?
I mean, I think they will, because for Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared the ceasefire agreement as a victory. Of course, he could then say, well, Hezbollah infringed the terms and therefore we have had to go back to fighting. But I think for Israel, it prefers not to have to go back to fighting, because one of the things mentioned by Benjamin Netanyahu himself when he gave a speech about the ceasefire agreement, he said this has allowed Israel to separate the Lebanon front from the Hamas front in Gaza. And I think Israel will prefer to focus its military engagement now on Gaza, as well as, to a lesser degree, Iran's other proxies in the region. And so for Israel, I think it will abide by this because it wants to deploy its military capabilities in other ways now. For Hezbollah, The fact that it has accepted this shows how weakened it has become, and in turn, how Iran has also been feeling the heat vis-a-vis Israel. I think Israel has demonstrated what it can do in terms of the damage it can cause. The degradation of Hezbollah militarily is extensive as a result of this war. And the key thing is the terms of the ceasefire make it impossible for Hezbollah to, in a way, regain its breath. If the terms had not been there, and if this had been simply, let's just stop the fighting but allow Hezbollah to move around, this would have been a different scenario, because Hezbollah could have then used it to kind of, regroup, recharge. However, the terms make it very difficult, including the transfer of weapons, which means Hezbollah is not allowed in those 60 days to recover. So I think it has no choice but to abide by the terms.
I see. And you also mentioned Iran, and you said that it's also a monumental decision by the Iranian authorities to sort of give green light to this agreement, to this ceasefire. Why do you think Iran has indeed given green light? What are Tehran's reasons, hopes?
I think Iran's calculations have proven to be erroneous, because Iran set up these proxies in the region, especially Hezbollah, as a defense mechanism. And Hezbollah has proven to be quite weak vis-a-vis Israel, which is not something that Iran had in its sights when it designed this, strategy of so-called forward defense, which basically relies on the proxies to be the outer level of the onion, defense onion. And this degradation of Hezbollah has led, I think, Iran to think, okay, if Hezbollah, which is supposedly the strongest, has been degraded this much, what does that mean for the other proxies that are not as strong as Hezbollah? So this leaves Iran feeling quite vulnerable, because it now knows that none of the other proxies will be able to protect it in any kind of huge regional, let's say, confrontation with Israel. So Iran is left quite exposed. And I think it is trying to now just minimize the losses and kind of retain what it already has, as opposed to, allow this fight to continue and allow Hezbollah to continue, knowing that this will lead to just further degradation.
Mm-hmm. One last question. Do you think the ceasefire will also impact somehow on the war in Gaza, in the Strip specifically?
One of the things that Benjamin Netanyahu mentioned in his speech is that Israel has now managed to separate the Gaza front from the Lebanon front. Of course, this rhetorically is another win for Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah, because the late leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, had vowed that Hezbollah would never stop the fight until the situation in Gaza is basically won by Hamas, or at least settled somehow. And this has now proven not to be the case. So this leaves Hamas completely exposed in Gaza. It can't anymore rely on Israel being distracted by other fronts, such as the one in Lebanon, and the ones elsewhere are actually very, very easy to kind of handle by Israel compared to Lebanon. So that means, unfortunately for Gaza, is that Israel will be able to continue its military campaign with much more comfort. And unfortunately, the ceasefire agreement will not have a political impact on Gaza either.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insights, Lina.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to have you.